Thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar. You will have Dr. Scott Bloomer presenting Making Sense of Patents, a guide for scientists and engineers. This will be the first in a series of 3 webinars that will be presented by Scott. And then we will have a 4th patent-related webinar presented by representatives from Mindsoft. Those descriptions as well as registration links are available at aocs.org/webinar. If you are interested in further webinars regarding patents. Scott is the Director of Technical Services at AOCS. Before coming to AOCS, he worked for a major research department, drafting, filing, and defending patents and carrying out freedom to operate studies. After several years working in Fats and Oils research labs, he became a registered U.S. patent agent. He understands patents from both the inventor's scientific perspective and the legal perspective and how to interpret between them. He presents a list of patents relevant to AOCS members in our membership magazine, Inform, and that column has run for 17 years. So we're really excited to bring Scott here to give us a comprehensive overview of patents as it relates to the AOCS interest areas. We will take questions at the end of the webinar, and in order to ask those, you will write them into the question panel that you will see in your control panel. Should you have any issues or need assistance, please just use the chat box and I will be right with you. And I do hope you enjoy today's webinar. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Bloomer.
Thank you, Amy. Welcome to this webinar where we will talk about patents. There are 47 slides, so now you know. So what we're going to focus on today is that patents are very difficult to understand. And papers are pretty easy to understand and extract information from. So we're going to look at why patents are difficult to understand and trying to figure out what strategies we can use to simplify that. And hopefully by the end of the webinar, you'll feel much more confident about picking up a patent and reading it and making sense out of it. I want to preface my talk by saying that I am not a patent attorney. I'm a registered U.S. patent agent, and so I'm not allowed to give any legal advice. So nothing that's said today should be construed as legal advice. Next slide, please. So why should we learn about patents? You know, the biggest reason is that, and this is a little known fact, that if you're only reading papers, you're getting less than half the story. I know people that have made careers out of reading papers, and they've read hundreds, even thousands of papers on a topic, and they've become subject matter experts. But what they don't realize is that they're reading less than half of what there is to know about their topic. And because a lot of times they only interact with people that read other papers, they don't realize that most of the information, the technical information that's published, is actually only ever presented in patents. So if you can understand patents, you're at a strong advantage. Most scientists actually never bother to read patents because it's difficult. Well, it will be easier after today. And so research departments often do not prioritize reading patents. The managers and directors often just trust the scientists to read what they need. Consequently, they just read papers because they're familiar with them. I have seen at there's an organization that I visited, and I've been following their patents for many years, and their patents are head and shoulders above ordinary patents. The level of innovation that they exercise in their patents is a lot greater than most patents. When I visited them, I found out that they have a department that assigns patents to each of the scientists working in the laboratory. And the scientists have to read, understand, and present the patent to the rest of the scientists. forcing them to really dig into it and extract the right information. The results are quite obvious in their patenting record. Another advantage to learning to read patents is, the companies that are actually doing the work, that are actually investing money, they don't publish papers very often. They will publish patent applications. And so if you want to find out where the money's going, that's the way to do it. Plus, it's really sad to talk to somebody who spent 2 years or more on a project, and they're presenting their results to a group, and somebody says, that this has already been patented. Your solution that you're presenting right here has already been patented by our dreaded competitor. That's a heartbreaking moment. There are a couple more reasons. The way patents are structured, they're all written, the entire first part of it is written to support the claims, and the claims are the legal stake, the legal area that the patent is designed to protect. And usually the claims are smaller in scope than the entire disclosure. So sometimes some of the technology that's disclosed is available if it's not covered by the claims, or if there was a patent application that was never granted as a patent. In each case, you need to ask a patent attorney about that, because this is a legal opinion, and the consequences of getting it wrong can be dire. And you can avoid infringing somebody else's patent. So that's why I think it's really important that you learn how to read patents. Now this is a colorized version of a woodcut. Flammarion's woodcut. Flammarion was an astronomer. And this is symbolic of the process of discovery and the process of research. So we have here our discoverer, and they have left the town, which is in the foreground, next to the tree, where they probably went to university and they probably learned how to do research. And they have started to explore further and farther from their original place. They're asking questions. They're asking questions that nobody knows the answer to. And finally, they've asked questions in the right way, and they have made a discovery. They've penetrated the boundary between what is known and what is not known. And they're looking at these mysteries. A lot of these, the wheel within the wheel is a symbol of mysteries that would have been common in the 1800s when this woodcut was made. So now this discoverer is going to take the information back, and they can publish it in the paper, or they can file a patent application. So we're going to talk now about papers and patent applications. First, papers. It's real easy for most scientists to understand papers because you had to learn about them at school. You might have had a journal club. You probably had others in your group that were publishing, and they would say, hey, would you read my paper to see if it looks good before I show it to the professor? And oftentimes people are allowed to publish their own research, so they have to write papers. So it becomes very familiar, and they learn without having to think about it what the patterns are. Now, the function of a scientific paper is to disseminate knowledge, to tell other people who are interested in the topic what you've learned, and hopefully you're the first and you can get a really big advantage. So you're writing for other scientists and seekers of knowledge. It's entirely an exchange of information type of process. And the information is very nicely sorted into sections. So what happens is scientists often don't even have to think about the pattern. When they pick up a paper, if they just want to know how this reaction was done, they just flip to the materials and methods section and read it. They know that they don't have to read the rest. So pattern recognition is a very powerful part of the human learning process. And it's the process by which we are able to take in information very quickly. And that's what's in operation when people read scientific papers. And it's very common. Everybody needs to use it when we're faced with something new. Certain people, it's a very common part of their job. And when you are looking at something new, pattern recognition happens like that. If it's a pattern that you're familiar with, your brain will almost instantaneously identify the pattern and will say, okay, this is what's important and this is what's not. You take your car to a mechanic. You go to a doctor. Chess masters become masters because they recognize patterns and they realize that this avenue is trouble, this avenue is a victory. And you don't even have to think about assimilating the information. So we have this very familiar pattern used in scientific papers. Title, abstract, introduction, methods, sometimes called materials and methods, results, discussion, sometimes discussion and conclusion, acknowledgments and references or literature cited. You could probably recite that in your sleep. And here's a cute little poster I found that illustrates the familiarity of the pattern of a scientific paper. And it's cute because the question that's being presented is so trivial. Are all apples red? And so you've got some people that say it's red. Dr. McIntosh says, yes, they are all red. And Granny Smith says, no, there are some green ones. So they went to the store, they examined the apples, and they present their results here in the abstract, introduction, methods, results, and discussion. It's cute because it's so familiar. So let's talk about patents. Okay, why are they difficult? Well, a lot of times people don't learn them in grad school or in the university as they would with papers. Sometimes professors don't understand them, and usually a university will have a technology transfer department. So when somebody invents something really cool, then the process is handed over to the technology transfer department, and there's a series of interviews and questions and back and forth. And so the process is not at all transparent to the people in the scientific department. Another really big difference that I hope to really hammer home today is that the function of a patent is to support this little tiny section at the end called the claims. You can have a 40-page patent with 1 page of claims. Usually there'll be 2 or 3, but it could be just 1 page. So the patents, the definition of a patent and the parts that are necessary in a patent are defined by nations, and they are rigorously described in the rules and regulations that apply. So you have to support the claims and you have to disclose the invention. Now, unlike papers, which are written for peers and scientists, which may be sometimes hostile, the patent examination process is not a friendly process. A patent is drafted and it's sent in, and the examiner wants to say no. So a whole lot of the pieces of a patent are written there to convince the examiner that they have no reason to say no. But after the patent is granted, it gets worse because the other companies that are working in the field may not like this at all, and they may decide, you know what, I know something that can cause that patent to be overturned, or we can take them to court. And so then you have hostile attorneys that are combing through the patent, looking for an error that they can capitalize on and make the patent go away. So it's a very different audience. And the other part of it is that there is not a core of editors and reviewers that will enforce the structure of a patent as there are with papers. There are rules about how you're supposed to present the information, but nobody's taking care of that part. So the information that's presented in patents is presented in a very different way, and there's much less structure than in papers. So if you don't understand all that, you're going to be confused, but it gets worse. So let's talk about this. Why do we have papers? To spread knowledge. Why do we have patents? Because the governments have set up this system for an exchange of value. You invent something really cool, and if you keep it to yourself, then you may gain by it. But if the governments can induce you to share your findings in exchange for something of value, then you share your findings and somebody else can read it and they can have an aha moment, and they can say, oh, I can take this very same logic and apply it to this problem over here, which is very different. So you give your information and the governments give you a monopoly, a temporary country-based monopoly, except for European granted patents, which are a special case, but I don't even want to get into that. So the patents exist to exchange value. But this is how you feel when you're trying to get your head around all this stuff. So let's learn about patent patents, okay? The bad news, okay? The structure is uniform, but unlike papers, the section names are not. Patents are written by attorneys and agents to fulfill their legal obligations, and they have this defensive mindset. They need to defend the patent claims against every possible attack that could happen for the next nominally 20 years. These people have often been in lawsuits where they've had to defend patents that they've written, and they've been bitten. So they've learned a thing or two. And they say, well, this argument could be made, so I'm going to draft this section here, which is a whole page long. The entire purpose is to provide a defensible position. So the rest of the bad news is that you don't get the nice, neat section names like you do with papers. So we're going to talk a lot about the section names and the kind of information that's put in there. But there is good news, and this slide is really important, okay? There actually is a uniform structure because information is presented more or less in the right order. But the key that you can learn is that when you look at the patents, you remember the information you're seeking, you focus first on the question you need to ask, and then you identify the function of each piece of information that you come across. And in 20 or 40 pages, you'll come across a lot of information. And so by thinking about the function of this particular sentence or this particular paragraph, you can decide, is this going to help me answer my question, or is this irrelevant? Now you're halfway there because you understand that a lot of the information that's presented is only to defend the legal position, and so that's much less confusing. So let's look at what the United States Patent and Trademark Office tells us are supposed to be the sections in a patent. This is what they tell us we're supposed to have. So after the front page, which I'll show you an example of, we have the so-called background of the invention. The background of the invention should correspond to the introduction of a paper. And then we've got something called the brief summary of the invention. Now, you don't find a brief summary of the invention in a paper. So this is the first place where people start to wonder, what's going on here? It's supposed to be a general statement about the invention itself. And then you've got a little section that talks about the drawings. This, again, is not present in a paper, but this is a very useful reference point because you have everything that came before and everything that came after. So when you're looking into the patents, you can think about the information that you need to find. And after today, you'll be able to say, well, I need to look in the section that's before the description of the drawings or after the description of the drawings, except when there are no drawings, because then this section is missing. Then there's the detailed description of the invention. In the past, when I've been working with inventors, and they say, patents are so confusing, I never know where to start, and I didn't have time to tell them all this, I would say, just look at the examples. And the examples are found in the so-called detailed description. Now, the Patent Office says it should be as short and specific as necessary. That's not what happens. It will talk about, in this section, preferred embodiment language, which will also be found back in the summary part. And you may look at it and say, well, what's an aspect? What's a preferred embodiment? What's an embodiment? These are all words that are simply used to say a way of carrying out the invention. And then finally, there will be the most important part for the people that are concerned with the legal rights, and that would be the claims. Now, the claims will contain pieces, and those are called steps or elements. And there are two different types of claims, independent claims and dependent claims. I'm not going to get too deep into that today, but I will. And then next week, I'm going to give a seminar on claim interpretation, which shows the process that you have to go through when a claim is confusing and how you can actually extract the information that you need so that it's no longer confusing. But this is more like what it looks like, really, okay? You've got a title or the title of the invention, the abstract. The background could be called background art. It could be called field of invention. It could be called technical field or description of related art, or it could have no title at all. The summary of the invention might be called the brief summary or a disclosure of the invention, which sounds to me like the detailed description of the invention. And sometimes it's combined with the others, with the previous section, and sometimes it has subsections, and sometimes it has no name at all, and sometimes it's missing. And then you've got the description of the drawing, and then you've got the detailed description. Okay, we talked about this section already, but it goes by many names. And detailed description, description of embodiments, description of a preferred embodiment. Can I give you a clue? An embodiment and a preferred embodiment are the same thing. A preferred embodiment is really not preferred. Description of the invention, example, or best mode for carrying out the invention. Here's some advice, okay? If you invent something and you send it off to a patent attorney, and they send you back your patent application draft, and it says in there, best mode for carrying out the invention, fire them immediately. The best mode should never be called out. That's the cardinal sin of drafting patents. Okay, the detailed description will also contain examples. So just to induce panic, this is the front page of a granted patent. It has all this information, and none of it makes sense. I mean, what is the field of search? That's code. You have to know the code. What would be this related U.S. patent application data? You have to know all this history, and it's very complicated. So a lot of times people look at the front and they just balk. This is apparently a breathable footwear piece. It looks like a croc. If you do look up in the upper right corner, you'll see that the patent number is US 6993858B2, and the B tells you it's a granted patent. I wasn't going to talk about that, but it's free. This is a break slide. Read it. Okay, let's look at the different parts. You remember with the paper, we had those 8 discrete parts which are nicely labeled. Well, the title, which is one of the most well-behaved sections, will be simply the titles I stole from the patent office. My favorite is product and process because it says nothing. Following that, you'll have a section about the field or the field of invention or technical field. So this first one is from the patent I'm going to talk about next week, okay? And let's look at it because it tells you in one sentence, the present invention relates to a process. Okay, process is an important word. For adsorption-based separation of bioparticles. Okay, adsorption-based separation of bioparticles. Okay, I think we know what that means. From an aqueous suspension. Okay, so they're suspended in water containing such bioparticles. Now, until you learn the code, you can trip over the words such bioparticles or said bioparticles because what it really means is the ones we just talked about. So such bioparticles are those very bioparticles we just talked about. I don't know why we have to do that. We can use the. So this background section that comes is supposed to be a summary of the art, but sometimes there's nothing there. When I was learning how to write patents, I had the senior patent attorney at the company I worked at taught me, and it takes about 5 years once you pass the patent bar exam to become good at drafting patents. And he said, Scott, don't put anything in this section. Leave it blank. Leave it out altogether. Don't talk about anything that went before. So this may be a very thorough summary of what went before, but it may be completely blank. The reason he said to do that is because he had been in a situation where the patent examiner used the summary or the background section that he had written as prior art to try to get him to prevent him from getting the patent claims allowed. This should only be about the past. So if you want to know about what happened before, what they were working on, or what the art was, the state of the art when they made the invention, this is the place you look. Okay, this is a kind of a long section here, okay? So we're going to talk about the so-called summary, brief summary, or summary of the invention. It should explain the invention to somebody who's unfamiliar with the invention. Maybe not your grandmother. They may need to be have some level of scientific knowledge, but it should not contain a lot of legal terms and things that are mysterious. And it should talk about the problem, it should talk about the solution, and it should tell why your solution is better than others. Now, sometimes this works in tandem with the earlier section about the past, because what you can do in that section is you can talk about all the previous attempts to solve the problem and how they fell disastrously and woefully short, setting yours up to come in as the hero to solve the problem. Now, here's where people get in trouble. Here's where it gets baffling. This section contains a lot of the pieces that the patent attorneys or patent agents draft to protect the invention from attack later. And so you may have a section where all of a sudden they start talking about, in one aspect of the invention, A and B are combined in the presence of C to form D. In another aspect of the invention, to that is added E. And it gets very long and repetitive, and it just doesn't seem to make sense. And the person looks at it and they say, why is this here? It doesn't make any sense. It's not teaching me anything new. It's not adding anything to the knowledge that I'm gaining from reading this patent. And sometimes people just give up. Well, all this redundancy is to create the legal arguments that are necessary to defend the patent. You often find this last part, repeating the objection or the objectives of the invention, as a lot of single sentences that look just like the claims. It's because they are just like the claims. So now we're going to talk about the process that happens that causes this to happen, that causes this problem to be developed. Okay, so we're going to come at this from the approach of inventor number X. Okay, so that's the perspective that you have. You're the inventor, you're inventor X, and you want to make dipalmitoyl or 1,3-dipalmitoyl 2-oleoyl glycerol, POP. So you know a lot about this, and so you take triolene and ethyl palmitate, and you put it together with a 1,3-selective lipase in the presence of this very small amount of water, and you get POP. We have to pretend this is never been done, because when I started doing research, this had never been done. This would have been really exciting, and it was when it came out. So the inventor is over the moon happy. They say, wow, I did it. I made POP. I've optimized the reaction. I've got a cost-effective way of doing it. I've tested it in the pilot plant. I know what I need to do to bring it to the plant. Let's file the patent application. So they write their invention disclosure, and they bring it to the attorney. And the attorney sees the germ of something so much bigger. So the inventor is so happy about what they've invented, and they don't understand that the attorney has a totally different perspective. And so the attorney looks at it, and they start turning each piece into an abstract and saying, okay, how can I make this fit into the largest class I can so I can claim the entire class? Because the attorney sees the inventor's invention as this big. but they don't want to claim that's that big. They want to claim as big as the moon. So they go through this process. And so here's what the inventor made. These same elements that we talked about earlier in the claim, each one of these would be called an element. And the patent attorney says, aha, triolene is a glyceride. Ethyl palmitate is an ester. A 1,3 selective lipase is a catalyst. This narrow water range, that's too narrow. We're going to go with something much broader. And POP is a structured triglyceride. So then the patent attorney goes off and they draft the patent application not to what the inventor invented, but to this large collection of classes that they have put together to try to get the largest claim they can. The patent attorney knows that the patent examiner is going to say no, and that they're going to be subject to hostile attack afterwards. And if you didn't invent this, when you read it, you're going to try and design around it. So they are putting as much information in there as they can to prevent these problems from happening. So in this case, the attorney may compile a big list of glycerides or esters or catalysts or dry conditions and resulting structured lipids, and they will be putting all that in to prevent designing around. So here's a couple of examples. Okay, so remember we started with triolene, right? But now look, here's what this guy did. This guy was me. I wrote this. Instead of just a simple combination of two triglycerides, which we actually invented, or which we actually had an invention, all these different oils are listed to prevent somebody else from taking the teaching of the patent and make a similar patent using Tsubaki oil, which, by the way, I've never heard of before I made this list, or hazelnut oil, or candlefish oil. And so you will come across this in the patent, and you understand that they've invented POP, and you know that you're never going to make POP from a whale oil. But here's whale oil in the specification. It's very confusing. Why is this here? And then the inventor used ethyl palmitate, but here we've got isodecyl esters, 1,3-propanediol esters, polyhydroxy esters, primary, secondary, tertiary alcohols. We've got a huge big list that has nothing to do with what the inventor invented, but they are parties in a class that the patent attorney wants to patent to get the broadest patent possible. So when you see this kind of information in a patent, you can just dismiss it and say, okay, that is legal protection type of language. I don't have to think about that because that doesn't answer my question. Unless you change your question to say, well, what other substrates could I use to make this material? But this is the way a lot of people feel when they start stumbling over these long lists. Okay, so we talked about all that stuff that happened before. Now we've got this marker point in the middle called the brief description of the drawing. Okay? There may be drawings, there may be no drawings, and this is a very short section, and it will just say, figure 1, the aerial view of the handle of the plow. Fun fact, did you know that Abraham Lincoln had a patent for a design of a plow? Now we go on to the detailed description of the invention, and this in many ways resembles a scientific paper because this is where the data is presented, and it has frequently much less of this confusing language in it. So it's a good place to start if you just want to learn about what they did. It doesn't talk about what went before, it talks about the present invention, but the examples are not like in a paper. The examples would be like a salad or something that's all mixed together because the example, each one can contain the method, results, and the conclusion. And there may be 20 of them. So it just keeps going on and switching back and forth between the customary order for a paper. Some of them are only in there's a smoke screen. They're defensive publications to keep you from patenting something similar. And some of them are insurance, because what happens is the patent attorney tries to claim this much, knowing that the examiner is going to say no. And the patent attorney may actually know that, okay, I'm writing a claim set this big, but I know that I really couldn't have this part because I know that the art is there. And I know there are patents over here, and I know there are patents over here. But instead of filing a patent application that has this big set of claims, I'm going to file all this and make the examiner push me back to these other boundaries so I can get all this other stuff too. So sometimes the first claim may not be granted. It may be too broad. So then you've got site claim, claim 2, claim 3, claim 4, and then you've got your examples here to support those claims so that you can say, look, here's the claim and here's the example. Now, the important part of this section is it must enable the claims. And another important part is it must disclose the best mode. If you ever have a patent that's filed that does not describe the best mode, it can be easily, well, relatively easily, overturned by legal action because it's an absolute necessity. It is very much against the law, and this is not legal advice, to draft a patent and keep the best mode secret. What happens if you file the patent application and invent a better best mode? Well, you're off the hook then. You can practice the better best mode, but it may not be covered by your claims. But it may be covered by the claims. And you can file what's called a continuation in part patent application that covers both the old and the new. So finally, we're at the claim. Okay? So now, the claims are hard to understand sometimes because they have very strict rules. And a claim has to be one sentence. So when a claim is a half a page long, that's a really long sentence. And so it gets broken up into sections with semicolons. And then each little section is an element that assembles the whole thing together. And I will go much deeper into the structure of claims next week, and there's a lot to know about them. So when you look at a patent, the first claim is always supposed to be the broadest claim. So to find out the most area that this patent covers, you can read the first claim. And so the first claim is very broad, and let's say that it's a composition comprising A, B, and C. Okay, so it's a candy made from sugar A and fat B and emulsifier C. Okay, so that would be claim 1. Then the next claim would be the composition of claim 1 further comprising flavor. So now the composition of claim 1 means, okay, it has the A, the B, and the C of claim 1, but it also has flavor. And so you have an independent claim, which is this broad claim, and then you have these other claims which hang from that. And you can tell that they hang from that because it says the composition of claim 1 or the method of claim 1. So your first claim is this big, and then your next dependent claim is maybe this big, and there's another one that's this big, and another one that's this big. And you can have multiple dependent claims, but we'll talk about that in another day. So you can tell they're dependent claims because they will refer back to an earlier claim. Now, when you're reading through the claims, if you come to a claim that does not refer back to claim 1, that's an independent claim as well. So when I would read patents, when I first needed to get an overview of what the technology was about, I'd flip right to the claims, I read the independent claim 1, I skip down, I find independent claim 2, and I read those. And once I understand those, I'm 90% of the way to understanding the patent for the purposes of a patent agent. They may be different purposes than yours. Okay. Finally, something familiar. The abstract should be useful, but sometimes it's not. This processes for making rubber tires are disclosed, comma, to advantage. Well, that tells you nothing except it's about rubber tires, and they're saying it's better than the other rubber tires that are out there. So you can't trust these either. So here's a handy chart that shows how scientific information in papers is presented and kind of where you might find it bleeding over in the patent. And so if you're looking at the patent application or the patent, expecting a nice clean set of information presentation like you get in a paper, it's going to be confusing. So this is a problem. So I made this little table that might help you, okay? You have these questions on the one side, and you have the place where you are most likely to find it, not guaranteed, but most likely to find the answer. So the rough idea of the invention should be in claim 1 and the field. The background should be in the background. And then the technical problem, the solution, and the advantages should be in the summary of the invention, assuming it's labeled. And the solutions that they tried should be in the detailed description. But what's really important to the company, what they really are putting their money on, will be in the claims. So that's helpful. Now, this is the secret, okay? This is the secret to really extracting the information, okay? So first of all, when you're going to read a patent, sit down and think about the question that you're asking. You don't just pick it up and read it. It's too much work. But what is the question that you're asking? I want to know how they did this. I know this company makes this infant formula, and I know they put this fat into it, and this patent is about how they made that fat. I want to know how they made that fat. Or I want to know what they used to make the fat. I want to know which enzyme they used to make the fat. So first of all, ask the right question. It is a long-standing practice of mine to spend at least as much time asking the question as is needed. And sometimes that's more than half the time that's needed. So ask the right question. Focus on the right question and ask yourself, what am I trying to learn from this? And then when you come across information, it won't be neatly boxed. So assign a function to it. Oh, this is just a list. That's for the legal defense. I'm not concerned with the legal defense. Okay, that's background. That's for the history. Oh, here's a fact. This fact is pertinent to my question. And you collect that and highlight that. And you can just highlight it on your screen. And then when you stumble over information that's already been presented, don't get confused by it. Realize it's just the way the game is played. Keep going, collecting the relevant information, and you will end up with a core body of teaching that will or will not answer the question you're asking. And that's the secret to extracting information from patent. Function, the function of the information that's being disclosed. Here are some conclusions. Patents are worth understanding. There are patterns. They may be learned and understood. Much, maybe most of the information in a patent is there to fulfill the legal obligations. It's not something you'd find in a paper. So you just can put it aside and say, that's for the patent attorneys to care about. And you can figure out what it is you need to learn by the function. And with that, thank you for your time and your attention. And I'd be happy to take questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Scott. As a reminder, if you will use the question area on your control panel, you can write in questions in that area, and we will have those answered. And so while we give everyone just a second to type, would you like to give us a preview of what you'll be talking about in the webinar next week?
Certainly. What I'll be talking about next week is extracting the information that's necessary to read and understand confusing claims. So there are certain steps that patent attorneys and patent examiners and patent agents go through to extract the meaningful information out of a patent and to understand what the confusing terms mean. So I'm going to go in detail through that process with a patent that, when I first read it, didn't make a lot of sense. And it's a patent that was written about an invention that my professor and my lab mate had invented. So it's personal to me.
Okay, thank you. So I do have a question, and they are asking, and I'm sorry, the question box just jumped away from me. Here it is. Please show again the parts of the patent, the Crocs patent, and please repeat what B means on the patent number.
Oh, sure. This is very, very important. Whoop, oh, skipped it. There it is. Okay. So one of the things that you have to realize is that if you're familiar with the process of submitting a paper, you write the paper, you send it in, and it gets reviewed by reviewers and looked at by editors. They'll send it back, and then you revise it, and then you hopefully have it published. Okay? So this first thing is never ever seen. It's only ever seen in its published form. But with patents, what happens is you file your patent application anywhere in the world. 18 months later, the patent application is published as an application, and it will have a number, and the number will end in A, and then another number. So then it goes through the patent office, and it will be examined, and there'll be arguments and letters that fly back and forth, and angry tirades. And then hopefully the patent is granted. The granted version will be identical to the filed version, except the claims will be different, because that's what they're fighting about. And when it's granted, it will have a B. Sometimes it's a B1, a B2, a B4, and those number codes get into details that I don't even remember right now. So for a US patent that's granted today, it'll be a 10 million or 11 million number, as opposed to this one, which is a 6 million number. The patent application, when published, probably looked like US 2003 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 A1. So the A means it's an application, and the B means it's an issued, granted patent. And there are very few occasions when another letter is used. Does that answer the question?
And should you have a follow-up question to that, if you will just write your follow-up in the question box, I will be on the lookout for that. Thank you for answering. So the next question is, what is the difference between a published application and patent pending status?
Oh, what a great question. Okay, so patent pending status is imbued into the technology the moment you file the patent application. Okay, so the very moment that you file the patent application, the technology is considered patent pending. And then, as I said, 18 months later, the application will be published. And all that time, it's been patent pending technology, and all the way up into, if it's issued, it's patent pending. Now, if it's issued, which is the same as granted, then you don't have to write patent pending anymore. It's actually patented technology. But if the patent application never turns into a granted patent, you shouldn't say patent pending on it after that. It's kind of like when you, I don't know if you've ever picked up an article and you'll look on the back and it says U.S. patent number 4,004,213,314. Well, that patent expired 25 years ago. And so it's kind of misleading for you to see an article that's manufactured today and, oh, it's patented. I better not do anything, to even come close to this. So it's patent pending immediately when you file the application.
Thank you. And we do have just a bit of follow-up to question one. Please let me know if you need me to reread that one, but they were asking about what B means. And they've thanked you for that answer and have now followed up with, are there other letters in the patent number aside from A and B?
Generally not. There are certain odd circumstances, but they are so rare that I don't remember coming across them. And often a granted patent, is cited without a letter. So in that case, if you see a patent citation, which is frequent, the reason I started this whole process of writing this webinar is because I got mad because once again, I saw that somebody had called a patent in a paper, they'd called the patent application a patented technology, and there was no corresponding patent. So, sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent. So you have an A and you have a B, and I forgot the rest of the question.
It was just, are there other letters aside from A and B?
Yeah, not that you need to worry about. Oh, I was trying to talk about if you see this number, and let's say it's a 7 million or a 7-digit number, like 9 million something. It's US 9 million something. Okay, that's a granted patent. Now, if you see US and then a year, like 2001, and then a long string, maybe 6 or 7 numbers, that's a patent application. So if there's no A or B at the end, that's how you tell the difference. If it has a year after the US, that's an application. Now, Europeans will have the same number for the application and the granted patent, and it'll say EU 2004 12245 A1, and then when it's granted, it'll be B1 or B2. But in the US, we can't do it quite that simply. So we'll have one long number for the application and then a serial number, as we see here, 6993858 for the actual grant. One more fact, you will see documents that say WO 1998 12345 A1. The World Patent Office does not have the authority to grant patents. So if a document is a world patent, it's only ever an application. And the Patent Office, the World Patent Office, was formed as a means to file a single paper or document or patent application in one place, so you didn't have to deal with, this was back in the days of mailing, trying to mail an application to Malaysia and to the Netherlands and to Canada and have them all be opened in those patent offices on the same day. Otherwise, the patent examiner in this country might say, well, no, there's a patent that was filed the day before. That's your exact technology. And then your own patent or patent application becomes priority against you. So if you see something that says WO at the front, it's never a patent, it's only an application. I think I talk about that in the third webinar.
Okay, so yeah, third webinar, please join us and go more into that. Will you talk about ways to effectively search the patent literature, especially when some patent titles are vague, such as process and product?
Once again, this has to do with asking the right question. And when searching patent literature, often there are several different ways you have to ask the question. So when I needed to do a freedom to operate study and say, okay, there is no technology in this field, so, or the technology is all expired patents, so we're free to do this particular operation, I would ask the question, and I would search, and I would ask the question another way, and I would search, and I would keep searching until I ran out of questions. And then I would read all those hits that I found and throw some out and keep some. And then I'd be informed about, oh, okay, there's another way to say this. And now I have another way to ask the question. So, and a lot of it depends on what you want. Now, if you are doing a legal inquiry, which you shouldn't be doing unless you're an agent or an attorney, then your job is a lot easier because you are searching primarily the claims. So that's a much smaller section. And there are really good tools out there. In fact, this fourth webinar, which will be by Mindsoft, is for a tool called PatBase. And I use PatBase extensively. And it's a very, very powerful tool. I believe there's a fee associated with it, so it's not something you can just use free like Google Patents. So as you're going through that process, you're going to, of course, make a list of keywords and hopefully refine your list of keywords as you go along. And so you're going to be looking through the patents and saying, you know, this one's a keeper, this one's not. And then what I would do is when I had my pile of keepers, after all that initial searching, then I'd parse through them and I'd pull out all the best information. And then repeat until I had the right answer to my question. Kind of gets a little vague in that part, but I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Next question, they thank you for your presentation, which I echo, and have a question about the glyceride example you gave in your presentation. And so they're asking if you claim it as a claim, one, dependent claim, but don't claim Tubaki oil in claim 2, dependent claim, can your competitor use the oil?
If the claim is drafted to cover a glyceride, if the claim language, let's say claim 1 says the process of making a structured glyceride combining a glyceride. Now, glyceride has been defined in the specification as any of these in this big long list. So that means that all of that stuff gets stuck into the word glyceride. So if claim 1 is allowed, then it doesn't matter if you don't call out Tubaki oil in a subsequent claim, that is patented technology, generally speaking. So you don't have to have a claim that specifically, if I understand what's being asked, you don't have to have a claim that specifically calls out any of them, because this big whole list of glycerides is incorporated into the claim by using the exact same language. And this is a real key in understanding patents. If you see a phrase, that phrase should always mean the exact same thing every time it's used in the patent. And a lot of times when I would draft a patent, I would spend a lot of time going through and making sure that every time I talked about something, I used the exact same words, and every time I used those words, it meant the exact same thing.
Next question is, should I bother about reading patents in other countries if I have to file a patent in the US?
It depends. The patent literature and all the papers and everything that's been published since the beginning of time, anywhere in the world, would be considered prior art against, could be considered prior art against your patent application claims. So, generally speaking, there's a trick, okay? So the trick is, you go to Google Patents, and you enter the patent number of a US patent by the same company. And then there will be a list over there of the different countries that that patent application went into. And if let's say that it's a German patent, but it's in the same family as the US patent, chances are very strong that all the data that's in that one will be found in the US patent. So you only need to read the US patent, generally speaking. Again, not legal advice, but usually that's a good way to cut down on the amount of work. Now, if you find a patent that doesn't exist as a corresponding US application, you probably would be wise to read it. But the good news is, as you gain experience, it gets much faster. You can just throw things out and say, nope, nope, nope.
Okay. Next question is, I sometimes read patents with very apparent claims, like, for example, just a blend of 2 oils. How is it possible that such simple things can get a granted patent?
Well, the first question I ask is it a patent application or is it a patent that's granted? Okay? Because a lot of times people are never taught the difference between the two. And so people will look at a patent application and they'll say, how can that be? But you can write anything you want in a patent application. And in a future webinar, I will show a really preposterous set of claims that was filed and published. And anybody that read it thinking it was a patent would say, wow, this is amazing. So if it's a patent application, hopefully the patent office will catch it. But sometimes the patent office doesn't. And sometimes I've read patents and I look at the claims and I say, too bad they didn't read my experiment from 1998, which I published, which did the exact same thing. And then the recourse is, well, how much time has elapsed? How important is it to have that technology available? Because there are paths by which you can challenge a patent in the patent office up to a certain amount of time after it's been granted, but it costs money. Or you can take it to court, but win or lose, it's going to cost you $500,000 in most cases to settle a patent suit. There is one sneaky thing you can do. You can have your attorney write a letter to their attorney saying, you have this patent granted, but my client has information that would render your claims invalid. What do you want to do about that? And generally speaking, the attorney for the company holding the claims will say, how about if we grant you a license so that you can do this too? Because that way they're not having the whole world discover that their patent was no good, which is expensive and embarrassing. I will not comment on whether or not that's legal. I don't know.
Sure. Do you feel that the change to first to file versus first to invent was a good change? It would seemingly increase the amount of provisional applications as folks rush to be the first to file. What are your thoughts around this change?
Well, it has good sides and it has bad sides. So on the good side, it harmonizes our processes with the rest of the world. And now we've been doing it long enough that just about every patent that is still valid should not be in that awkward transitional section that happened, unless I'm getting my dates wrong. So, yeah, the rush to file can be a problem. I think what is, and I'm just speculating here, what is likely though, that everybody is going to have a little different approach to the problem. And so it's possible that different companies would file very similar applications, but they'd have different claims and they'd have different objectives. And so they may be considered by the patent office to be very different. So yeah, it's not a great system. I mean, the patent system as a whole is not a great system at all. It doesn't work well. The patent examiners are very overworked. There's a lot of feeling that they don't do their job. There's a lot of feeling that some of them are really, really strict and some of them are really sloppy and loose. But it's the system we have. And hopefully reform will continue until it gets better.
Okay, and the next question is, it will always surprises me that many people, especially in marketing or business operations, think that having a granted patent gives them automatic freedom to operate. They are inevitably shocked when I've told them, no, it's just a right to exclude.
You can have them listen to my third presentation, third webinar in this series, because I will address that very question.
Excellent. Okay. And this looks like it's yet another follow-up to when we were talking about the letters in patents. And so can you say that a granted patent will either have be or no later? Or I'm going to assume that's letter or no letter.
If it's correctly referred to, if it is a B, you can be sure that it's a patent that's granted. However, if it's a European patent and there's no letter, you don't know if it's a patent application or a granted patent. And if it's a US patent, you have to remember that if it doesn't start with a year, like 2004, it's going to be a granted patent. But if it starts with a year, it's going to be an application in the absence of a letter to tell you more closely what you have. If you are in doubt, you should run it into Google and see, because let's say you've come across a patent application. You go, oh, good, it's just an application. But you don't know that there's not a granted patent. So it's always a good idea to look it up and say, okay, it's a granted patent. Now, let's say it's a granted patent in another country and not in the US. Let's say the US patent didn't go through and you're in the US and your company only wants to practice in the US. Usually a granted patent in another country doesn't have any bearing on what happens in this country. Unless you try to export to, if you try to manufacture here and export to that country, you may be running afoul of the law. But that's, again, not legal advice.
Next question is, do you think the pandemic and its lingering after effects are likely to result in a reduction in the number of filings? And if so, how significant will the reduction be? And do you think that will be permanent?
There will be a reduction because people haven't been able to get in the lab. I would speculate a 10 to 20% reduction in volume. And I would also speculate that we will return to the same level as before. Scientists are not stupid. And what it will produce is that a lot of times, I see this with young scientists, okay? The qualifier I always use to differentiate a new scientist from an experienced scientist is they both get the answer. The young scientist gets the answer because they ask all the questions and do all the experiments and get all the answers. And then they, oh, that's the right answer. The experienced scientist spends a lot more time thinking about the question and they ask the right question. They'll do a significantly lower number of experiments and they'll get the right answer. Now, people have had time to think about things, and hopefully there are many, many ideas that have been generated, but they know that they're behind in the lab, and they know that the lab time is at a premium. So hopefully, instead of doing 30 experiments, they'll pick the most important 10 and do those. That could generate as much patentable art as the 30 would. And so hopefully people are focusing in and learning the skills of a mature scientist in this time.
How difficult is it to become a patent agent and especially to pass the patent bar exam?
Well, to become a patent agent, you have to have at least a bachelor's degree in a hard science, which is defined by the U.S. Patent Office's Office of Education and Discipline. So basically anybody that is interested in science or has a degree in science will qualify if they have at least a bachelor's. You can have a master's, a licentiate, a PhD. That's all fine too. Then there is a test. The test is on this book. I hope you can see that. That's the Manual of Patent Examination Procedures, and I've been around long enough that mine was the paper copy. Now, the test is known for being very difficult. When I was in the process of studying for it, the pass rate was 40%, and sometimes as high as 60%. And these were all very intelligent patent attorneys. So it requires serious discipline preparation. But I passed it on the first try, so it can be done. It's a difficult exam. You are not allowed to take anything into the exam room. You sit at a computer that's not yours. You have an electronic copy of the Manual of Patent Examination Procedures in which all the answers are found, and you start answering the questions. Sometimes the questions are a page long, and the fact patterns, there'll be 5 different fact patterns, which can be a third to a half a page long each, and you have to choose one of them. So it's easy to get tripped up on the details. What I did find in preparing for it was that there are 3 sections in the Manual of Patent Examining Procedures. There are the procedures, there are the statutes, and then there are the guidelines, or that's not the name of it, but the law, and then the intermediate section, and then there's the big part, which is the procedures. I studied the law, and only the law, until I was comfortable with it. And then I studied the more broad sections, and then after that, when I was comfortable with all that, then I started studying the detailed part, and it all made sense doing it that way. I regret that I don't remember the section names.
The next question is a follow-up to the one related to the pandemic and patenting, and they're just clarifying that their question related to a potential and permanent reduction in the number of patent application filings is related more to reduce outside expenditure and patenting by corporations, and not the capability or inventiveness of scientists. I was wondering if reduced patenting might become a new normal for companies.
That is what I have noticed. The pendulum swings frequently over a long period between trade secrets and patents. And 3 years ago, when I last checked in, the pendulum was swinging heavily over towards trade secrets. And each of them has advantages. The trade secrets are more protected now than they were 20 years ago when trade secrets were more common. However, as the pendulum swings, the disadvantages of trade secrets will become more and more obvious, and the vacuum of patents will become more and more obvious to companies, and some person will achieve a position of prominence in a research organization, and they'll say, look at this opportunity. There's a vacuum here. We can file a lot of patents, we can get a lot of patents, and we can really start to dominate this technology. Because if you have a trade secret and somebody files a patent on it, you can keep doing what you were doing, but you can't expand. And so that puts a collar around you. Now, I would say that it doesn't look to me, based on a very limited sampling, that there's any reduction in patent filings in Japan. So the Japanese are very savvy people, and they understand that you need to file in other countries too. So I believe that a lot of the American companies are reducing their filing. This is just my speculation. But I don't believe that it's permanent. I believe the pendulum will swing back. Did I answer the question?
I believe you did.
Oh.
Yes, thank you. And it looks like that was the last question. Thank you, everybody, for a great discussion. You really asked some fantastic questions. We do hope that you can join us as we continue the conversation regarding patents over the next coming weeks. And with that, thank you so much, Scott, for your time on this. And I hope everyone has a great day and remainder of their week. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Amy.